Prologue. Charisma. A gift given to few is a complex skein of many threads. Nature bestowed that gift on Steve Jobs, along with a spellbinding ability to captivate a crowd that is the hallmark of evangelists and demagogues. To witness one of his hours-long performances is to watch a master showman deliver an unscripted, free-ranging monologue about nothing but technology and the world according to Steve Jobs. Once, when he was younger and more callow, the skeptics said this bravura performance art was all he had. There was an arrogance about the young prince of technology on his first ascendancy at Apple that made him seem cold and empty, even as he pushed the envelope of what was possible with a personal computer. He attracted followers, but it was a cult. 15 years in the wilderness, after being rejected by his own company, changed all that. It made him human. Chapter 1. Roots. Steve Jobs was born on February 24, 1955, in San Francisco. Beyond that one fact, he knew virtually nothing of his birth parentage, until he was already grown and famous. Within weeks of birth, the mother of baby John Doe signed over legal custody of her infant son to a San Francisco couple, Paul and Clara Jobs, who had been thwarted for nearly 10 years in their hope of having children. 3 years later, the family moved to a house in South San Francisco, an industrial town with a number of new housing tracts for returning veterans. Even at 3 years old, Stephen was shaping up to be quite a handful, what polite folks today tactfully call a hyperkinetic child. He often started his day at 4 in the morning, and had a gift for getting into trouble, like the time he and a playmate had to be rushed to the hospital after they decided to see what ant poison tasted like. Another incident involved him jamming a bobby pin into an electrical socket and getting a nasty burn for his curiosity. Nonetheless, his antics didn't dissuade the Jobs from adopting another child, a daughter, Patty, 2 years younger than their son. Perhaps Stephen needed a bit more supervision than most, but he was obviously bright, and in many ways seemed much like any other American kid in the mid-50s. He mugged for the camera in neighbors' Super 8mm home movies, roared around the neighborhood on his tricycle, and watched unhealthy amounts of television, perhaps an early sign that he would turn into a youngster who did not make friends easily. Not long after Paul had been born, the Nobel Prize for Physics was awarded to John Bardeen, Walter Brattain, and William Shockley for their invention of the transistor. Paul and Clara Jobs could not have imagined how this invention would change their son's life, and lead him to change the lives of so many others. By age 10, Steve's interest in electronics was patently obvious. He was practically attracted by electronic gadgets, using his youngster's imagination to see their nearly unlimited potential. By now, his dad had moved the family down the peninsula to Mountain View, a bedroom community for the electronics companies sprouting up around Palo Alto, which was where Paul Jobs now continued his work as a repo man. The neighborhood his parents had chosen was particularly suitable, filled with engineers working for Hewlett-Packard and other electronics firms. On weekends, they could be found at their garage workbenches, where they usually welcomed the lonely boy looking to learn and keep busy. It was one of these neighbors who let Steve play around with a simple carbon microphone he had brought home from the lab. Steve was fascinated with the device and asked many perceptive questions. Soon, he had spent so much time at the engineer's home and so impressed the man with his precocity that he was given the microphone for his own. At 11 years old, Steve was already able to demonstrate enough strength of will to convince his family to sell their home and move. His trademark intensity, the single-mindedness that he could apply to remove any obstacle to his progress, was already evident. In 1967, the Jobs family moved to the flatlands of Los Altos and found themselves smack in the middle of what may have been the largest assemblage of science wonks ever gathered in one place since the Manhattan Project. Los Altos and the surrounding towns of Cupertino and Sunnyvale were sown through with electrical engineers and their families. Lockheed was booming at the time as the prime contractor for NASA in the space race, and all through the area a profusion of electronics companies were springing up to service the moon launch. It was also the ground zero for a wave of innovation and entrepreneurial activity that exploited the world of electronic miniaturization, ushered in by the invention, first of the transistor, and then the integrated circuit. In every garage there was a welcoming brain for Steve to pick, and a box or two filled with spare parts or obsolete equipment that could be taken apart after school.